Have you ever felt like you were being watched? A presence in the room, just at the edge of your vision, only to find nothing there? But what if something was there, lurking in the shadows just beyond your perception? They are called shadow people, dark, faceless figures seen by countless individuals around the world. Some describe them as fleeting shapes, barely visible before vanishing into darkness. Others have seen them watching, waiting, and sometimes moving closer. What are they? Are they spirits, trapped between worlds? Interdimensional beings peering into our reality? Or could they be something far more sinister, something that feeds on our fear? For centuries, reports of these shadowy entities have surfaced in every culture, across all walks of life. Skeptics call them tricks of the mind, illusions brought on by sleep paralysis or psychological stress. But those who have encountered them, they know better. Today we delve into the chilling accounts of real-life encounters. Brace yourself, because once you've seen them, you may never feel alone in the dark again. Story 1. The Watcher in the Corner. It started with a feeling, a creeping sensation of being watched. At first, Daniel dismissed it as paranoia. He was used to sleeping in darkness, the familiar outlines of his bedroom giving him comfort. But lately, something felt wrong. Then, one night, he saw it. A shadow stood in the far corner of his room, tall, motionless, featureless, just a deeper black against the darkness. His heart pounded as he stared at it, unable to look away. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Daniel tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, a coat hanging on his chair, a shadow cast by the street lamp outside. But every night, it was there. Same place, same stillness. And when he turned on the light, nothing. One night, he decided to test it. Lying in bed, he kept his eyes open, pretending to sleep. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something unseen. Minutes passed. Then, something changed. The shadow moved, a slow, deliberate step forward, then another. The shape was clearer now, tall, humanoid, but void of any detail. Daniel's breath hitched. His body was frozen in place, gripped by a primal fear. He wanted to run, scream, anything to break the moment, but he couldn't. The figure stopped at the foot of his bed. Silence stretched between them. The room felt colder, the air pressing down on him. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stepped back, fading into the corner once more. Daniel never told anyone. He convinced himself it was a dream, a trick of exhaustion. But the next morning, as he sat up in bed, something made his blood run cold. The carpet at the foot of his bed was disturbed, as if someone had stood there, watching. And from that night on, the shadow never left. Story 2. The Man in the Hat. Some figures are vague, blurry shadows in the corner of your eye, but others have detail, and sometimes they come back. Mark first saw him when he was 8 years old. He woke up in the middle of the night, the room unusually quiet. Something told him not to look, but his eyes drifted toward the doorway. That's when he saw it. A tall, dark figure stood in the hallway. Unlike ordinary shadows, this one had shape. Broad shoulders, long limbs, and atop its head, a wide-brimmed hat. It didn't move, didn't speak. It only stood there, watching. Terrified, Mark hid under the covers, heart pounding in his chest. Minutes passed, then hours. When he finally dared to peek again, the figure was gone. The next morning, he told his mother, but she dismissed it as a bad dream. But the man in the hat wasn't just a nightmare. Years passed, and the memory faded. Then, one night, as a teenager, Mark stayed up late studying. A strange feeling crept over him, an overwhelming sense of unease. Slowly, he turned toward the doorway and froze. The man in the hat was back. Same broad shoulders, same long coat, same wide-brimmed hat. But this time, something was different. This time, Mark could feel it. An oppressive, almost suffocating presence. And though the figure had no face, Mark knew it was staring at him. Unable to move, he shut his eyes, willing it to disappear. But when he opened them, the figure was closer, still silent, still watching. This time, Mark didn't hide. He forced himself to stand, to step forward. The second he did, the shadow figure dissolved into the darkness. For years, Mark never saw it again, until one day, in casual conversation, his sister mentioned seeing a shadow in their house as a child, a tall, dark figure, wearing a hat. They were never alone. Story 3. The Whispering Shadows. Some places carry a presence, a heaviness in the air, a feeling that something unseen is lurking just beyond the veil of reality. For Jake and his friends, that place was the abandoned house on the edge of town. It was supposed to be a harmless adventure, a dare, just 5 teenagers exploring a crumbling, forgotten building. The locals whispered rumors, stories of disappearances, strange noises, figures glimpsed through broken windows. But they were just stories, right? Armed with flashlights, the group stepped inside. Dust filled the air, and the wooden floors groaned beneath their weight. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Then came the whispers. At first, it was faint, a distant murmur just beyond recognition. Jake turned to his friends. "Did you hear that?" They all nodded, uneasy. The whispering grew louder, surrounding them, though the house was empty. It wasn't wind. It wasn't creaking wood. It was voices. Then, the shadows moved. Along the walls, elongated shapes slithered and stretched, dark figures shifting unnaturally. The friends froze as a tall, inky silhouette detached itself from the darkness. It had no features, no eyes, but it was aware of them, watching, waiting. Panic set in. One of them bolted for the door, but as they turned, their phones and flashlights flickered, screens distorting with static. The whispers became frantic, an unintelligible rush of voices. Shadows swarmed the walls, shifting like liquid darkness. Then, the tallest figure stepped forward. Jake felt something cold brush against his arm, a sensation that sent ice down his spine. A whisper distinct from the others filled his ears. "You shouldn't be here." That was enough. They ran, out the door, into the night, breathless and shaking. But the feeling never left them. Even as they reached safety, the whispers echoed in their minds. That night, Jake checked his phone. The screen was fine, except for one thing: his camera roll. The last photo taken wasn't one he remembered, a blurry, distorted image of the house's doorway. And standing in it was a shadow, watching them leave. Story 4. The Shadow That Mimicked. Reflections are supposed to show us the truth, a perfect copy of ourselves. But what if one day, your reflection wasn't? Samantha had always found mirrors unsettling. Maybe it was the way they could distort reality, or maybe it was just her imagination. But one night, she realized her fear wasn't irrational. It started with something small. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror brushing her hair, she noticed a delay, just a fraction of a second. The movement of her reflection wasn't perfectly in sync. She blinked and leaned in closer. Had she imagined it? She shook it off. But over the next few days, the feeling grew stronger. Every time she glanced at a mirror, something felt off. A twitch of the eye she didn't make, a tilt of the head that lingered a second too long. Then came the night she finally saw it. Samantha was in bed, scrolling through her phone when a strange movement caught her eye. Her closet mirror reflected her room, but something was wrong. Her reflection was still sitting up, staring directly at her, even though she had already turned away. Her breath caught in her throat. She slowly turned back to the mirror, heart hammering in her chest. The reflection moved normally again, mirroring her exactly, but she knew what she saw. Terrified, she covered the mirror with a blanket. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, she forced herself to check. Pulling the blanket away, she expected to see her own tired reflection, and she did, at first. But as she turned to leave, She saw it. Her reflection was still facing her. This time, it smiled. Samantha screamed and ran out of the room. She refused to sleep with a mirror uncovered ever again. But even now, in the dead of night, she sometimes swears she hears something. A faint, whispering laugh coming from behind the glass. And sometimes, when she looks, she wonders if her reflection is just a little too slow to follow. Story 5. The sleep paralysis terror. Sleep is supposed to be a time of rest, a time of peace. But for Mia, sleep became something else entirely. A doorway, a nightmare she couldn't escape. It started with sleep paralysis. She'd wake up in the dead of night, unable to move, unable to scream. The weight on her chest was unbearable, like something was pressing down on her, suffocating her. But the worst part wasn't the paralysis itself. It was what she saw. At first, it was just a shadow, a vague, shifting darkness in the corner of her room. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It only watched. Then, the next time, it was closer. Each episode, the shadow seemed to inch toward her bed, a tall, faceless figure with jagged edges, like its very shape was flickering in and out of existence. She could feel its presence, malicious, hungry. One night she made a terrible mistake. She met its gaze. The moment she did, the figure lunged. A sudden rush of darkness, swallowing her vision, filling her ears with a deafening static. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She could feel hands gripping her arms, her throat, cold, invisible hands. And then, she woke up. Drenched in sweat, gasping for air, she told herself it was just sleep paralysis, just her mind playing tricks on her. But as she sat up, something caught her eye. Her closet door was open, just a crack, and inside, the darkness shifted. From that night on, she refused to sleep without the lights on. She kept her door locked, her closet shut tight, but none of it mattered. Because no matter what she did, no matter how hard she tried to stay awake, she always woke up to find the shadow closer. And one night, she knew, if it reached her, if it touched her again, she might never wake up at all. Scientific and paranormal explanations, shadow people, watchers in the dark, visitors in the night. Are they real? Or are they simply figments of the human mind? Skeptics argue that shadow figures are nothing more than tricks of the brain, illusions caused by sleep paralysis, hallucinations, or an overactive imagination. Scientists have studied these experiences and found possible explanations. One of the most well-known causes is sleep paralysis. When the body transitions between sleep and wakefulness, the mind can remain half-dreaming while the body remains frozen. Many people who suffer from sleep paralysis report terrifying figures standing over them, watching, waiting. The brain, still caught in a dream state, projects shadowy forms into waking reality. Another theory suggests pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random shapes. In the dark, our minds try to make sense of shadows and movement, sometimes creating figures that aren't really there. And then, there's the electromagnetic theory. Some researchers believe that strong electromagnetic fields can disrupt the brain, causing hallucinations of shadowy figures. Could certain locations, old houses, abandoned buildings, carry electromagnetic disturbances that make us see things? But not everyone is convinced these explanations are enough. Throughout history, shadowy beings have been described in folklore, religion, and mythology. Many cultures believe in spirits, demons, or interdimensional entities that exist just beyond our perception. Some say shadow people aren't ghosts, but something older, something otherworldly. One of the most chilling theories suggests that shadow people are interdimensional beings, entities that slip through the thin veil between worlds, sometimes appearing in ours. Could they be watching us from another plane of existence, only visible when the conditions are just right? And then there's the darker theory, one whispered among paranormal investigators. Some believe shadow people are not just watchers, but feeders. They thrive on fear, drawing energy from the terror they create. Real or imagined, one thing is certain: those who have seen them never forget. And once you notice them, they may start noticing you too. Conclusion and final chilling. Thought: shadow people, hallucination, ghost, interdimensional being, or something else entirely. No matter how you explain them, one fact remains: millions of people across the world have seen them. Their descriptions are eerily similar: dark figures with no discernible features, always watching, always lurking in the corners of the night. Some believe they're nothing more than tricks of the mind. Others are convinced they are something far more sinister. But here's the most unsettling thought of all. If shadow people are real, what do they want? Are they simply observing us? Or are they waiting for something? And if so, what happens when they finally decide to act? Tonight, as you turn off the lights and settle into bed, you might find yourself glancing toward the darkest corner of your room. And if you feel that familiar prickling on the back of your neck, the deep, instinctual feeling that something is watching you, whatever you do, don't look. Because if you see them, they'll know that you see them. And once they know, they never really leave.